The mansion was on fire. Not literally, but it might as well have been. Smoke alarms blared throughout the 12-bedroom estate as three 6-year-old children ran wild through the halls, their latest nanny fleeing out the front door with her suitcase in one hand and her dignity in tatters. "I quit!" screamed Mrs. Henderson, the 47th nanny to abandon the Morrison triplets in just 2 years. Paint covered her expensive suit, her hair looked like she'd stuck her finger in an electrical socket, and there was what appeared to be oatmeal dripping from her glasses. "Those children are demons. No amount of money is worth this." Behind her, the sound of breaking glass echoed from inside the mansion as something, probably expensive, met its doom at the hands of 6-year-old Emma, Ethan, and Elijah Morrison. But standing at the gates of the estate, watching this chaos unfold with calm, observant eyes, was a woman who would change everything, a woman who saw past the destruction to something everyone else had missed. Keisha Washington adjusted her simple black bag on her shoulder and walked toward the front door as Mrs. Henderson's car sped away, tires squealing. She had no idea that in the next 24 hours she would accomplish something that 47 other caregivers had failed to do. She was about to discover the secret that would transform 3 broken children and heal a family that had forgotten how to love. 6 months earlier, David Morrison stood in his home office, staring at a stack of resignation letters from nannies, babysitters, and tutors. At 35, he was one of the youngest billionaires in the country, having built his tech empire from nothing. He could solve any business problem, negotiate any deal, and outsmart any competitor, but he couldn't handle his own children. "Sir," his assistant Maria said from the doorway, "that was the agency on the phone. They're declining to send any more candidates." David rubbed his temples. "What do you mean, declining? Apparently word has gotten out about the triplets. No professional caregiver in the city wants to work here anymore." David's heart sank. Emma, Ethan, and Elijah had been difficult since birth, but things had gotten worse after their mother Sarah died in a car accident 2 years ago. What started as normal grief had turned into something much more destructive. The children seemed determined to drive away anyone who tried to care for them. They had flooded bathrooms, hidden frogs in beds, put salt in coffee, and once even managed to superglue a nanny's shoes to the floor. The more loving and patient someone was, the more creative their sabotage became. "There has to be someone," David said desperately. "What about less traditional agencies? Someone who specializes in difficult children?" Maria hesitated. "Well, there is one place. It's not really an agency, more like a referral service for people who work with troubled kids. But sir, they don't come with the usual credentials." "I don't care about credentials anymore," David said, looking at a photo of his 3 children on his desk. They looked so innocent in the picture. Emma with her bright blonde curls, Ethan with his mischievous grin, and Elijah with his serious dark eyes. "I just want someone who won't run away." Over the next few months, David watched in horror as nanny after nanny fled his home. Each one lasted shorter than the last, and each departure left his children more convinced that no one would ever stay. There was Miss Crawford, who quit after finding her bedroom completely covered in finger paint. Walls, ceiling, furniture, everything. The triplets had worked all night to create their masterpiece. Then came Mr. Rodriguez, a patient man who specialized in behavioral problems. He lasted 3 days before the children convinced him that the house was haunted by making spooky noises and moving his belongings when he wasn't looking. Mrs. Chen, an experienced grandmother figure, made it almost a week before she discovered that the children had been slowly replacing all her belongings with identical items covered in glitter. Her coffee cup, her reading glasses, her favorite sweater, everything sparkled. The worst was probably Mrs. Johnson, who genuinely seemed to care about the children. She tried to understand their pain, talked to them about their mother, and even started making progress. So the triplets escalated. They convinced her that David was planning to send them away to boarding school, showed her fake documents, and made her believe she was their only hope. When Mrs. Johnson confronted David about the fake boarding school plans, the truth came out. The betrayal in her eyes as she realized the children had manipulated her broke something inside her. She packed her bags that very night. "Why?" David asked Emma one evening after yet another nanny had quit. "Why do you do this to people who are trying to help you?" Emma, the unofficial leader of the trio, looked up at her father with eyes far too old for her 6-year-old face. "Because they always leave anyway," she said simply. "Mama left. Everyone leaves. So we make them leave fast, before it hurts too much." David felt his heart break all over again. His children weren't being cruel for fun. They were protecting themselves the only way they knew how. Her name is Keisha Washington, Maria said, reading from a very short file. 28 years old. She worked in group homes for troubled children before becoming a private caregiver. Her references are unusual. Unusual how? David asked. One says, she has a gift for seeing the child behind the behavior. Another says, Keisha doesn't give up, even when everyone else would. And this one just says, she works miracles. David looked at Keisha's simple resume. No fancy degrees from expensive schools, no certifications in child psychology, just experience working with kids everyone else had given up on. The agency warned me, Maria continued, that she might not be what we're expecting. She doesn't look like the usual nannies we hire. I don't care what she looks like, David said firmly. Does she think she can handle the triplets? Maria smiled for the first time in months. She said, and I quote, Honey, I've dealt with worse. When do I start? Keisha Washington stepped off the bus at the gates of the Morrison estate and whistled low under her breath. The mansion was bigger than any building in her old neighborhood, with perfectly manicured lawns and a circular driveway that could park 20 cars. She had grown up in a tiny apartment with 4 siblings, where her grandmother raised them all after their parents died. Money had always been tight, but love had never been scarce. Grandma Washington had taught Keisha that children weren't bad. They were just hurting, and hurt children acted out in ways that made no sense to adults. Every child is fighting a battle you know nothing about, Grandma used to say. Your job isn't to win the war. Your job is to love them through it. As Keisha walked up the long driveway, she could see faces watching her from upstairs windows. 3 little faces studying this new person who dared to enter their territory. She didn't wave or try to look friendly. Instead, she simply nodded at them with respect, the way she would acknowledge any worthy opponent. The front door opened before she could knock. A harried-looking man in an expensive suit stood there, clearly David Morrison himself. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept properly in months. Ms. Washington? He said hopefully. That's me, Keisha replied, shaking his hand firmly. You can call me Keisha, and you must be the father of the 3 little generals I saw upstairs. David blinked in surprise. Generals? Keisha smiled. Oh yes, those children have been running a military operation to defend this house. Very impressive, actually. Most adults couldn't organize something that effective. Before David could respond, the sound of running feet echoed through the mansion. The triplets appeared at the top of the grand staircase like 3 blonde angels, if angels could look that calculating. Emma stepped forward as the spokesperson. Are you our new nanny? I'm Keisha, she replied, not answering the question directly. And you must be the famous triplets I've heard so much about. We're not famous, Ethan said suspiciously. We're terrible. Everyone says so. Keisha said thoughtfully. Terrible at what, exactly? The children exchanged glances. This wasn't the response they were used to. At everything, Elijah said quietly. We make people leave. Interesting, Keisha said, setting her bag down. That's actually a very advanced skill. Most people can't make other people do anything. You 3 must be pretty smart to figure out how to control adult behavior like that. The triplets stared at her in confusion. Was she complimenting them? Mr. Morrison, Keisha said, turning to David. I'd like to see their rooms and meet with you privately in about an hour. But first, I need to have a conversation with my new roommates here. Roommates? Emma asked suspiciously. Well, we're all going to be living in the same house, Keisha said matter-of-factly. That makes us roommates, and roommates need to establish some ground rules. As David watched from the kitchen doorway, Keisha sat down on the living room floor with the triplets arranged in a semicircle around her. Not on the expensive couches or at the formal dining table, on the floor, like they were camping. Okay, Keisha said. Let's get the business out of the way first. I know you 3 have been working very hard to protect yourselves. You've gotten really good at making adults leave before they can hurt you. That's actually pretty smart. The children said nothing, but David could see they were listening intently. Here's the thing, though, Keisha continued. I'm not like the other adults you've met. I didn't come here because I need a job or because your dad is paying me a lot of money. I came here because I heard about 3 kids who were so good at taking care of themselves that they scared off 47 grown-ups. 47? Ethan asked, impressed despite himself. 47, Keisha confirmed. That's a record, by the way. I once knew a kid who scared off 32 teachers, but 47 caregivers? That's professional level. Emma leaned forward slightly. What happened to the kid who scared off 32 teachers? He grew up and became a very successful lawyer, Keisha said with a straight face. Turns out, knowing how to read people and protect yourself are very useful skills in the adult world. The triplets looked at each other with something that might have been hope. So here's my proposal, Keisha said. You can try to scare me away like you did the others. I won't stop you, and I won't get mad, but I want you to know up front, it's not going to work. Why not? Emma challenged. Because I don't leave people I care about, Keisha said simply. And I already care about you 3. You don't even know us, Elijah said softly. I know enough, Keisha replied. I know you love each other so much that you work as a team. I know you're smart enough to outsmart 47 adults. I know you've been hurt really badly and you're doing everything you can to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I know that under all that armor you've built, you're just 3 kids who miss their mama and want someone to love them without leaving. The silence in the room was deafening. David held his breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then Emma, the tough leader who had been protecting her brothers for 2 years, did something that shocked everyone. She started to cry, not the angry, frustrated tears David was used to seeing. These were deep, heartbroken sobs from a little girl who had been trying to be strong for too long. Without hesitation, Keisha opened her arms, and Emma collapsed into them. Within seconds, Ethan and Elijah had joined the group hug, all 3 children clinging to this stranger who had somehow seen straight through their defenses to their hearts. David watched in amazement as his children, who hadn't let anyone comfort them in 2 years, melted into Keisha's embrace like they'd been waiting their whole lives for someone to hold them this way. But what happened next would test everything Keisha thought she knew about these children and prove that some battles are harder to win than others. The front door suddenly burst open with a crash that shook the entire house. A woman's voice, sharp and angry, cut through the emotional moment like a knife. David, what is the meaning of this? Who is this woman with my grandchildren? Standing in the doorway like an avenging angel was Victoria Morrison, David's mother-in-law, the children's wealthy grandmother, and the person who had been secretly undermining every caregiver for the past 2 years. She had just arrived to deliver an ultimatum that would change everything, and she was not happy about what she saw. Victoria Morrison stood in the doorway like a storm cloud in designer clothing, her silver hair perfectly styled and her cold blue eyes taking in the scene before her with obvious disgust. The triplets immediately pulled away from Keisha and huddled together, their earlier breakthrough forgotten in the face of their grandmother's disapproval. David, Victoria said, her voice dripping with disdain, I specifically told you not to hire anyone else without consulting me first. And this person is clearly not suitable for my grandchildren. Keisha slowly stood up, keeping her movements calm and non-threatening as the children cowered behind her. She had dealt with difficult relatives before, but something about Victoria's entrance felt different, more calculated, more dangerous. Mother Morrison, David said, his voice tight with frustration. I didn't know you were coming today. Obviously, Victoria snapped, pulling out her phone. I've just spoken with Mrs. Henderson. She told me some very disturbing stories about the children's behavior. It's clear that your methods are not working. She looked directly at Keisha with undisguised hostility. I don't know who you are or what unqualified agency sent you, but you can leave now. I'm taking the children with me. The triplets went rigid with fear. Emma grabbed Keisha's hand tightly, whispering, Please don't let her take us. But Victoria heard everything. Don't be ridiculous, Emma. You're coming to live with me properly, where you'll learn discipline and respect. Your father clearly can't handle raising children. That's when Keisha did something that stunned everyone in the room. She started laughing. Not a mean laugh, but a knowing, almost amused chuckle that made Victoria's perfectly composed face flush with anger. Oh my, Keisha said, shaking her head. It all makes sense now. What makes sense? David asked, confused. Keisha looked from Victoria to the children, then back to David. The real reason 47 caregivers couldn't handle these babies, the reason every single one of them gave up so fast, the reason these children have gotten so good at protecting themselves. Victoria's eyes flashed dangerously. I don't know what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything, Keisha said calmly. I'm stating a fact. You've been sabotaging every caregiver who came to this house. The room went dead silent, except for the sound of Victoria's sharp intake of breath. That's ridiculous, Victoria sputtered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Keisha walked over to the coffee table where David kept a stack of resignation letters. She picked up the top one and read aloud. Mrs. Henderson writes here that the children told her you said she was just another gold digger trying to trap their father. David's face went pale. Mother Morrison, is that true? And Mrs. Chen, Keisha continued, picking up another letter, mentions that the children asked her if she knew you were planning to fire her anyway because Grandmother says Daddy doesn't really want us here. The triplets looked up at Keisha with wide eyes. Emma whispered, You believe us? About what Grandmother says? Of course I believe you, Keisha said gently. Children don't make up specific lies like that. They repeat what they hear. Victoria's mask was starting to slip. You have no right to come into this family and make accusations. Mrs. Johnson, Keisha interrupted, reading from another letter, says the children showed her documents about boarding school plans. Now, I'm wondering, who in this house would have access to official-looking documents? Who would know exactly how to make a fake boarding school enrollment look real? David was staring at his mother-in-law with growing horror. You made fake documents? And most telling of all, Keisha said, setting down the letters, every single caregiver mentions that the children's behavior got worse after they had private conversations with their grandmother. Victoria's face was now bright red. How dare you? No, David said, his voice growing stronger. How dare you? The truth was hitting him like a freight train. For 2 years, he had blamed himself for failing his children. He had watched them become more and more destructive, thinking he was a terrible father who couldn't provide them with stable care. But it wasn't his fault. It was Victoria's. Is it true? David asked, kneeling down to his children's level. Has Grandmother been telling you things about the nannies? The triplets looked terrified, caught between their father and the woman who had been manipulating them for 2 years. Emma, always the bravest, spoke first. She said you didn't really want us around, that you were trying to find someone to take care of us so you didn't have to. Ethan nodded miserably. She said the nannies were just pretending to like us to get your money. And she said, Elijah added in a whisper, that if we were really good for someone, you might send us away to live with them instead of her. David felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Oh, my babies, is that why you've been scaring everyone away? You thought I was trying to get rid of you? All 3 children nodded, tears streaming down their faces. We thought, Emma sobbed, if we made them all leave, then you'd have to keep us. David pulled his children into his arms, his own eyes filled with tears. I would never, ever send you away. I love you more than anything in the world. I've been trying to find someone to help take care of you because I work too much, not because I don't want you. Victoria watched this reunion with growing panic. Her control over the situation was slipping away. This is all very touching, she said coldly, but the fact remains that these children are out of control. They need structure, discipline, proper education. David, you know I'm right. Your wife would have wanted— Don't you dare, David said, standing up with a fury Victoria had never seen before. Use my wife's memory to justify what you've done to our children. What I've done? Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. I've been trying to save them from your neglect. That's when Keisha stepped forward again, her voice calm but carrying an authority that made everyone listen. Mrs. Morrison, she said, you've been traumatizing these children because you can't handle your own grief. Victoria stared at Keisha in shock. No one had ever spoken to her so directly before. You lost your daughter, Keisha continued gently but firmly, and that's a pain I can't even imagine. But instead of dealing with that grief, you decided these children were the only piece of her you had left, so you made sure no one else could bond with them. That's not true, Victoria whispered, but her voice was shaking. You convinced them that their father didn't want them, so they'd turn to you instead. You sabotaged every caregiver so you'd be the only stable adult in their lives. You made them afraid of abandonment, and then positioned yourself as their only safe harbor. David was staring at Victoria with a mixture of hurt and disgust. Is that what this has been about? You've been making my children miserable so they depend on you? I love them, Victoria said desperately. They're all I have left of Sarah. No, Keisha said firmly. They're not pieces of your daughter. They're whole people with their own needs, their own personalities, their own right to be happy. And what you've been doing isn't love, it's possession. The triplets were watching this conversation with fascination. For the first time in their lives, an adult was standing up to their grandmother and defending them. Children aren't meant to live in fear, Keisha continued. They're not supposed to have to choose between adults who claim to love them. Real love doesn't make children feel guilty or scared or confused about who they can trust. Victoria's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. I just wanted them to need me. After Sarah died, everyone moved on except me. David went back to work, the children were growing up, and I felt like I was losing her all over again. So you made sure 3 innocent babies stayed broken so you could feel needed, Keisha said, not unkindly but without sugarcoating the truth. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Emma, who had been listening to everything with the intensity only children possess, walked over to her grandmother. "Grandma," she said in her small voice, "we love you. But we don't want to be sad anymore." Ethan nodded. "We miss Mama too. But being mean to nice people doesn't bring her back." Elijah, always the quietest, added, "Mama wouldn't want us to be scared all the time." Victoria looked down at her grandchildren, really looked at them. For the first time in 2 years, she saw the dark circles under their eyes, the tension in their small shoulders, the way they still held themselves ready to run or fight. She saw what her grief had done to them. "Oh my God," she whispered, sinking into a chair. "What have I done?" "You lost your way," Keisha said gently. "Grief can make us do things we never thought we'd do. But it's not too late to fix this." David was struggling with his own emotions. "Mother Morrison, I trusted you. I thought you were helping. I blamed myself for everything." "I know," Victoria said, tears finally coming. "I'm so sorry, David. I was so angry at the world, so lost without Sarah, and I took it out on all of you." Keisha knelt down to the triplets' level again. "What do you think? Can we forgive Grandma and help her learn how to love you better?" The children looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations that twins and triplets are famous for. "We can try," Emma said finally. "But she has to promise not to lie to us anymore. And she has to let Keisha stay," Ethan added firmly. "We like her. And no more scary stories about Daddy not wanting us," Elijah finished. Victoria looked at her grandchildren with fresh eyes. "I promise. All of that. I promise." David turned to Keisha with amazement. "How did you figure it out so quickly? It took me 2 years and I never even suspected." Keisha smiled. "I grew up in a house where adults fought over children like possessions. I learned to recognize the signs. Plus, these babies are too smart and too loving to be naturally destructive. Their behavior was learned, which meant someone was teaching it to them." "So what happens now?" David asked. "Now," Keisha said, "we all learn how to be a real family." 6 months later, the Morrison mansion was transformed. Not the building itself, that was still as grand as ever, but the feeling inside it was completely different. Laughter echoed through the halls instead of screaming. The kitchen smelled like cookies instead of fear. And in the living room, an amazing scene was unfolding. Victoria sat on the floor with Elijah, helping him build a tower of blocks without trying to control every move he made. Nearby, David was reading a story to Emma, who sat curled in his lap without any of her old anger or defensiveness. Ethan was showing Keisha a drawing he'd made. Not a chaotic scribble designed to upset adults, but a careful picture of their whole family standing together in front of their house. "Tell me about your picture," Keisha said, admiring his work. "That's all of us," Ethan explained proudly. "Daddy, me, Emma, Elijah, Grandma Victoria, and you. We're all happy because nobody's leaving. And nobody's lying," Emma added from her father's lap. "And we're allowed to love people without it being scary," Elijah said quietly. Victoria looked up from the blocks with tears in her eyes, but happy tears this time. "I'm sorry it took me so long to learn how to be a good grandmother." "You're learning now," Emma said generously. "That's what matters." David caught Keisha's eye and mouthed, "Thank you," for the 100th time that week. Keisha just smiled and settled back into her chair, watching the family she had helped heal. The triplets still had their moments. They were still strong-willed, intelligent children with big personalities, but now their energy went into creative play and learning instead of survival and destruction. They had kept their promise to her too. In 6 months, they hadn't tried to scare her away even once, because they finally understood something that had been missing from their lives for too long. They were loved unconditionally, and that love wasn't going anywhere. As the evening wound down and the children got ready for bed, Emma approached Keisha with a serious expression. "Keisha," she said, "can I tell you something?" "Always," Keisha replied. "We weren't really bad kids, were we?" Keisha knelt down to Emma's level. "No, baby. You were never bad kids. You were hurt kids who learned to protect yourselves the only way you knew how, but you don't need that protection anymore. Because you stayed," Ethan said, joining the conversation. "Because we all learned how to love each other better," Keisha corrected gently. Elijah, who had been listening from the stairs, came down to join his siblings. "Are you going to stay forever?" Keisha looked at these 3 amazing children who had taught her as much as she had taught them. "As long as you need me, and as long as your daddy wants me here, I'm not going anywhere." "Good," all 3 children said in unison, and wrapped her in one of their famous group hugs. As David tucked his children into their beds that night, something he had been able to do peacefully for 6 months now, he reflected on how much their lives had changed. The woman everyone said was just a caregiver from the wrong side of town had accomplished what 47 credentialed professionals could not. She had seen past the chaos to the hearts of 3 children who needed someone to believe in them. But more than that, she had exposed a painful truth that had been destroying his family and helped them all heal from it together. Emma, Ethan, and Elijah Morrison were no longer the terror triplets who drove away every adult who tried to care for them. They were confident, happy children who felt secure in their father's love and safe in their own home. And it had taken just one day of someone refusing to give up on them, to begin their transformation. As Keisha turned off the lights in the children's rooms and headed to her own cozy apartment above the garage, she had refused David's offer of a room in the main house, saying families needed their space. She smiled at the sounds of a peaceful household settling down for the night. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. But tonight, 3 children who had spent 2 years fighting the world could finally sleep soundly, knowing they were loved, safe, and home. The triplets had found their guardian angel, and she had found her calling. Sometimes the most broken children just need someone who refuses to see them as broken. And sometimes the most impossible situations just need someone who refuses to believe they're impossible. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. We read every comment.